moonlight spills like a blade across the pines, bark peels, frost smokes. A howl splits the dark, long, ragged, hungry. It rolls over creek stones and graveyard fences, rattles the ribs of the sleeping town. Silence answers. Then a deeper thing replies, not a howl. A bark torn inside out, a dogman's challenge. The forest tightens its grip. Leaves hold their breath. Two shapes move. One is moon-born sinew and curse. One is war-bred tendon and spite. They circle. They scent old blood. On new ground, the night locks the door. No mercy inside. At whispering narratives, we carve horror you can feel in your teeth. If you make it through, mark survival. Subscribe before the next full moon. Now step in and don't look back. Under a hunter's moon in the Appalachian deep, the old paths wake. On the north ridge, a man unthreads his name as his spine climbs like a ladder of fire. On the south hollow, a dogman rises from a den of roots, shoulders armored in scars, eyes like lantern glass. The canopy becomes a coliseum. Fog draws the lines between them, a crown no hand can hold. The right to rule the hours between midnight and dawn. They stalk, they answer, they close. The night keeps score in meat and breath. Neither will kneel. Rage writes the rules. The forest will read the winner at sunrise. The forest did not sleep that night. It only pretended. Every root and branch held its breath, listening. The mist lay heavy on the ground, silver and thick, curling around the pines like smoke from an unseen fire. The air smelled of iron and sap. It had rained earlier, one of those half-hearted mountain storms that washed dust from the leaves but left the world raw and slick. The woods gleamed, wet and waiting. Something ancient moved beneath that green cathedral. It was not the wind. It was older than weather, older than prayer. Even the animals knew. The foxes were gone. The owls held their calls in their throats. The night itself seemed to kneel. On the ridge, Voss stood barefoot in the clearing where the earth bowed to the sky. He had not been here in years, but the place remembered him. The trees leaning inward, the soil holding the faint heat of other nights like this one. He'd hoped the curse had faded, that time had buried it. But curses do not age. They wait. The moon rose slow behind the clouds, dragging its light across the mountains like a blade. It came out swollen, veined and red at the edges, bleeding into the mist. Calder looked up and felt the ache begin. It started as it always did, a pulse behind the eyes, a tremor in the spine, the slow crawl of something remembering its true shape. He dropped to his knees, his breath tore out of him in ragged bursts. The change came, bones flexed, skin rippled, ribs groaned outward until the cartilage shrieked. His jaw cracked open on both sides, teeth lengthening, rearranging into a snarl made for killing. The sound that left his throat wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was the scream of a soul splitting in two. His nails blackened, curled, became claws. The air around him grew hot with steam from his own body. Muscles swelled until his shirt split down the back. His spine snapped upright, then bowed forward again, joints popping like gunfire. When it was done, Voss was gone. What rose in his place was the werewolf, a cathedral of muscle and fury, the moonlight rippling through his fur like water over iron. His chest heaved in the rhythm of thunderclouds. His breath fogged the air in thick white plumes. He looked up, and the moon looked back. Then he howled. The sound pealed through the valley. It slid down the slopes and along the creeks, over graveyards, through barns, through the dreams of every sleeping thing. It rattled window panes. It made unborn calves kick in their mothers' bellies. It was the kind of howl that makes the world smaller just to contain it. For a long second afterward, silence. Then an answer. At first, Calder thought it was his echo, but echoes don't change pitch halfway through and they don't come from miles away. The second sound was lower, heavier, almost metallic, like a chain dragging over stone. It was not a howl. It was a bark torn inside out. The dogman was awake. The hairs on the werewolf's neck rose. Every instinct screamed a single word: rival. He turned toward the valley, nostrils wide. The wind carried it, the scent of musk, rot, and old blood. Somewhere out there, the dogman was moving, each step deliberate, each breath a challenge. Calder began to walk, shoulders rolling, claws scraping against bark as he passed. The forest tilted around him, branches bent, leaves trembled. He moved like a storm with a pulse. Down in the hollow, the dogman lifted its head to the same moon. It was taller than Calder by a head, but thinner, all sinew and angles. Its fur was patchwork, patches burned, patches healed, the body of something that refused to die. Its muzzle dripped water from the creek. Its eyes glowed amber, not like fire, but like the eyes of things that live too long in darkness. It sniffed the air, and the smell of wolf made it grin. Its lips curled back to show fangs, chipped and blackened. Then it answered. The bark rolled through the valley again, shaking the leaves loose from their branches. The dogman was calling the werewolf by name, not Calder, not man, but beast. Between them lay miles of forest, but already the night was smaller. The moon above leaned closer, drunk on the promise. Even the fog seemed to pull aside, eager for blood to mark its course. Calder broke into a run. Each stride carried him faster than wind, claws cutting deep into soil. Trees flashed by in streaks of silver. He bounded over logs, through shallow creeks, across patches of moonlit grass that looked like veins of quicksilver. Every heartbeat pounded in his skull like a war drum. The dogman ran too. It didn't sprint. It loped, that ugly, uneven gait that should have been clumsy, but wasn't. Its arms hung too long, its spine bent too far, but every motion had a cruel precision. It knew this forest better than Calder ever could. It had lived here, buried prey here, fed on hunters who thought silver was enough. They were moving toward each other, toward the inevitable. By the time they met, the night had folded itself into silence. No crickets, no wind, no river, just two heartbeats growing louder. Calder slowed to a crawl, breath steadying. His fur was wet with dew, his claws flexed, sinking into the mud. The dogman's scent came from ahead, rank, heavy, close. He crouched lower, a shadow shifted beyond the ferns. Eyes glowed. The dogman stepped into the moonlight. For one breath, both creatures froze, studying. The dogman's chest rose and fell, slow, deliberate. The werewolf's ears flattened. Then they moved, not together, not apart, just gone. Two blurs vanishing into black, soundless, each becoming the other's nightmare. The forest exhaled. The duel had begun. Night thinned to a ribbon and wrapped itself around their throats. The forest rearranged its bones, paths shifted, hollows deepened, and the old fences leaned in as if to watch. The moon rode higher, fat and colorless now, a coin rubbed smooth by too many wishes. Every living thing made itself small. The duel belonged to tooth and tendon. The werewolf slid between birches, a low gray tide licking at trunks. He moved without noise, not because silence was a choice, but because it was his nature. The world forgot to hear him. Wet leaves received his weight like the backs of bowed heads. His nose drank the dark, moss and deer, creosote from a forgotten railbed, the metal tang of a trap long sprung. Beneath it all, the reek that mattered. Musk curdled with rot, old wounds salted with memory. Dogman. He traced it to a break in the brush where thorns were torn inward, not outward. The other hunter had passed here and had not cared if the plant screamed. He put a claw in the gouge, measuring the reach. Too long for man, too cruel for wolf. A rival who had made a life of not missing. Downslope, the dogman loped along the creek stones, placing each hand as carefully as a violinist sets fingers on a string. It tasted the air with its mouth open, the cold burning the back of its throat. The wolf's scent thrilled it, cleaner, sharper, edged with silver like the rim of a chalice. This one would not run. This one would make the night ring. They began, a slow braid through the timber, wide arcs closing like a snare. Sometimes the dogman climbed, spine bending double, hands sinking into bark up to the knuckles. Sometimes it dropped to all fours and flowed low and mean, belly brushing the fern. The werewolf answered with his own geometry, ankle-deep glide, then standing still so completely that frost considered forming on his fur before he moved again. Grave markers rose from a clearing ahead, chalky stones tilted like bad teeth. The werewolf entered first. Names had washed from most of them. The ones that remained were short and biblical, men folded back into earth before their children learned how to speak. He walked between them and felt their sleep tilt toward his heat. The dogman skirted the fence line, dragging its ruined hand along a picket, leaving a dark smear every third step. The sound was a metronome for murder. They met at the far corner, and did not strike. Eyes held. The dogmans were banked fires, the werewolves were winter glass. A dead wreath hung from a gate between them, twigs rattling against wire. The world clicked on the beat of that rattle. Then both shapes were smoke again, parting without turning away, each promising the other a better moment. The forest obliged by offering a barn, roof peeled, doors slumped open, hayloft collapsed in a sigh that never finished. The dogman slipped inside first, shoulders brushing old spider kingdoms into panic. It knew this place. It had slept here in winters when the creek went to glass and the deer learned to prey. It stepped around holes a man would fall through and set itself in a corner at a slant where moonlight made a ladder from the broken boards. The werewolf's shadow crossed the threshold. He did not enter. He inhaled the barn and let its story climb into him. Rust, oil, mouse urine, dry rot, the faint chemical sting of feed salt. And there, above all of it, the patient reek of the thing waiting inside, blended with an older ghost of itself, like an echo preserved in dust. The wolf smiled without lips and backed away, knowing a trap when the trap bragged. Both hunters shifted course. The dogman emerged on the opposite side, amused, a shoulder roll shaking splinters from its fur. The werewolf threaded toward the railbed, where ties sank like coffins under blackberry vines. They paralleled one another on either side of the thicket, keeping pace without seeing, each hearing the other's breath come and go like surf behind a wall. A coyote cried far off, and a second voice answered it. Wrong by a note, wrong by a species, wrong like a mirror delays your reflection by a heartbeat. The werewolf stopped dead. The dogman had learned his pitch already and was sending parts of it back to him, trimmed and salted. The response crawled under his hide and lit a string of old fires, arguments at kitchen tables, the snap of a badge case, a woman's whisper at a window with the light off. None of it was language now. All of it was cud for fury. He cut left and found sign, a sapling bent to the ground and tied there by claw, a rabbit gutted neatly and hung from its own sinews like a wind chime. Cruelty deployed as handwriting. The werewolf read it and did not blink. He stepped under the hanging thing, nose to hot blood, and moved on with it, brushing his shoulder like a blessing withheld. The dogman reached the rail trestle first and stood above the culvert, watching water limn its belly with moon. It listened to the wolf approach, then took a fingertip and wrote a line across the frost blooming on the beam. When the werewolf arrived, he placed his paw over the mark and felt the message through the wood. Come, take me. He didn't. He circled instead, patient as erosion, until the wind twitched the other way and brought him what he needed. Where the dogman had picked up speed, where it had misjudged a rock and scuffed the outside toe, where a burr had caught in the seam of fur under the arm. He took those crumbs and built a man from them, tall, stubborn, laughing in the places that hurt. The picture steadied the hunt. A meadow opened like a mouth. Fog lay in it from ankle to knee, a quiet ocean. Mice stitched its surface with dark thread and ended their stories in mid-sentence as the hunters entered. The werewolf slid one way around the bowl, the dogman the other, keeping the distances constant, each waiting for the other to step wrong. Every breath condensed and hung as temporary lace in the air. The moon shrugged off a shawl of cloud. Their shadows widened until they touched. The first near impact came there. The dogman fainted high, claws carving a V in mist. The werewolf went low and inside, a single cuff that would have taken a face if a face had stayed where faces stay. Fur tore. Something wet hit grass. They passed through each other like boxers' slip jabs, but the grass remembered, flattened, stained, still warm when wind ran a hand over it a minute later. They entered timber again, tighter now, trunks close as teeth. Here, the dogman excelled. It darted between bowls, changed levels without warning, seemed to stand in 3 places at once. The werewolf allowed the other's advantage and shortened his own frame, keeping elbows tucked, staying knife sharp and centered. He took a shallow cut to the forearm to learn the angle of the dogman's favored rake. He let blood mark a trunk and watched how quickly the other turned toward it. He banked the math and moved on. Time became elastic. Shadows lengthened, then fled. The moon swam through a sky that had forgotten stars. The duel slowed, then snatched, then slowed again. The forest learned their shapes and began to place furniture for them. A fallen poplar at the height of a leap, a hollow log smelling of fox to draw an eye, a sudden break in the canopy that laid a silver square on the ground, like a trapdoor. At that bright square, the dogman tested the wolf with hunger that wasn't about meat. It stepped just beyond the glow and whispered 3 sounds, not words, but the taste of a name. The werewolf froze and felt the human inside him rear like a burned horse. He stepped into the light anyway, and the dogman applauded him with breath. They were close enough now to trade heat. The wolf's exhale slid across the dogman's muzzle. The dogman's wet tongue clicked behind its teeth, and the wolf felt the motion in the roots of his own. One more step either way, and the hill would taste bone again. Instead, both broke contact. The dogman vanished into a laurel hell that swallowed smell. The werewolf climbed a slope stitched with quartz and oak, setting each foot on stone to deny the earth a story. For several minutes the forest got only absence, as if both had become ideas and the night was struggling to remember them. The return was spectacularly small. A pine cone rolled, a tuft of fur lifted and settled. A drop of blood ticked from a fern tip into a puddle and made one circle before it was absorbed. The circle meant center. They were back to it. The werewolf found the old fire road and took it at a canter, letting the straight line tempt the dogman into cutting across. It did. They met at an angle where maps go wrong. The dogman slashed for the eyes. The wolf took it on the brow ridge and gave back a rake across the ribs that opened 4 shallow mouths. Both flinched. Both smiled with more teeth than art can capture. Both disappeared again, more certain. Midnight shrugged its shoulders. The moon tipped a hair. The tree line climbed around a bald hill like spectators finding better seats. Stone waited at the top, ringed with char. The smell of old lightning lived there. Both hunters felt it and angled up, drawn by the promise of open ground where luck can't hide. They arrived within heartbeats of one another, climbing different faces, climbing the same story. The air atop the hill tasted like iron filings and old rain. The world offered them a circle without fences, and dared them to ignore it. They did not ignore it. They stepped into it and let their shadows meet first. The hill waited like a loaded trap, granite bones showing through thin soil, black trees circling it like witnesses too afraid to flee. Lightning had split one oak there long ago, and the char still ran through its trunk like a vein of ink. The place remembered violence. It had been hungry for another taste. They climbed from opposite sides, 2 storms seeking the same sky. The moon hung over them, no longer red, but the color of peeled bone. Its light poured down with the chill weight of water, coating fur and claw in a feverish shine. Even the stones sweated. The werewolf reached the crown first and stopped. His chest rose and fell in heaves that shook dew from grass. Blood streaked his flank, drying to black. Behind the mask of beast, the man flickered once. Calder, the sheriff, the husband. But it was only the ghost of a match struck in a hurricane. He was what the moon wanted him to be, rage wrapped in shape. The dogman came over the rim on all fours and stood slowly, vertebrae ticking. Its ribs looked carved rather than grown, its muzzle split in a grin that was half contempt, half invitation. Steam rose from its wounds, but the smell wasn't pain, it was persistence. Two predators that the world itself had built to answer each other. They moved before the thought finished forming. Impact. The sound was thunder being born. Bodies locked, slid, broke apart. The dogman's claws raked, catching the wolf across the shoulder. Flesh opened in petals. The werewolf hit back with a headbutt that cracked the other's snout sideways, teeth scattering like hail. Both stumbled, both laughed through blood. The fight became rhythm, hammer, anvil, spark. They were craftsmen shaping mortality. Each blow revealed another layer of hate until hate became worship. When the dogman drove the werewolf backward into the broken oak, the tree exploded into splinters and caught fire from the friction of their heat. Flames climbed slow, casting them in opposite halos, one silver, one rust. The air filled with the smell of wet fur and burning wood. Their breaths came like engines missing beats. The dogman lunged again, using the dead trunk as leverage, both feet planted on the wolf's chest, forcing him down. The werewolf rolled, used the momentum to twist, and the two went end over end. Crashing through stones, tearing the hill open like a wound, they landed in the circle where lightning had once struck. The ground there was glassy, slick, perfect for blood to slide. The werewolf came up first, grabbing the dogman's arm and wrenching it backward until the shoulder popped. The dogman's scream was so high it bent into silence, but its other hand was already carving across the wolf's ribs, the claws finding the seams between breaths. For a moment they held each other upright by pain alone. Then both broke free, panting half-blind. Rain began, a fine mist that hissed on the fire and painted them in steam. The moonlight blurred, their shapes became silhouettes, moving faster than the eye could sign. The dogman tried for the throat. The werewolf dropped, swept a leg, caught its ankle, pulled. The dogman fell forward. The werewolf's knee came up, meeting jaw, snapping it shut with a sound like a gunshot. The dogman's head whipped sideways. The wolf seized that instant, wrapped both arms around its waist, lifted, and threw. The body struck stone hard enough to crack it, but monsters don't stay down for pity's sake. The dogman rolled, came. To its feet, one arm hanging dead and still smiled. It spat a tooth. Mine. It breathed, or maybe only exhaled. The word hung like fog. Calder's humanity twitched, just enough for the memory of voices, of a child's laughter somewhere long ago. He hesitated. The dogman saw it. It leapt. They hit again, shoulder to shoulder, tumbling through fire into shadow. Sparks lifted around them like a swarm of doomed stars. When they stopped, the hill was slick, the moon was half hidden, and the forest below had gone utterly still. The fight had silenced everything that believed in dawn. They separated. One more time, circling, bleeding, smiling through ruin. The dogman fainted, dropped to a crawl, lunged low. The werewolf sidestepped, bringing a claw across its spine, feeling vertebrae shift under his hand. The dogman shrieked. The werewolf pressed in, biting the shoulder until tendons snapped. The taste of blood was copper and smoke. The dogman retaliated with its head, smashing the wolf's muzzle flat. Bone cracked, teeth shattered, vision flared white. They both reeled back, then forward again, drawn by a gravity older than stars. The D-moon tipped another degree west. Somewhere thunder rolled, too far to matter. They stood, two ruins still pretending at supremacy. The Dogman raised its broken arm like a salute. The werewolf mirrored it without knowing why. Then they charged, one final time, the world collapsing to the width of that space between them. When they struck, the sound drove birds from trees 5 miles away. The ground split, lightning answered, and in that flash the forest saw its gods. When the thunder's echo died, a slower sound took its place, dripping steady, patient blood into soil. The hill steamed like the flank of a sleeping dragon, everything that had roots bent low, as if ashamed of what it had seen. The werewolf lay half in the crater they had carved, sides heaving. His fur was blackened in streaks, burned by his own friction. The Dogman crouched a few yards away, its jaw sagging open, tongue swollen from where it had bitten through it. Both were breathing in time, unwilling partners in survival. The rain thinned to mist and finally stopped, leaving only the hiss of cooling rock. Calder clawed his way upright. Every muscle was a separate pain. His ribs clicked like teeth when he drew breath. He turned toward the Dogman, expecting a final charge, but the other creature only tilted its head and laughed without sound. The laugh said, "You haven't won. You've only lasted." He turned away first, limping toward the tree line. The Dogman didn't follow. There was a truce in that silence, the kind predators make when even rage is tired. Downhill, the forest opened its ribs to receive him. He collapsed beside the creek. The water was high from the earlier storm, quick and silver, a moving mirror that refused to show mercy. Calder leaned over it and saw both faces, the wolf and the man, sliding across each other like oil and water. For an instant the man was winning. Short, dark hair plastered to a bleeding forehead, eyes gone glassy. With exhaustion, he whispered his own name as if it was someone else's prayer. Then, the reflection shifted and the beast took him again. The fur came back first, growing from the skin like mold. Bones twisted, healing wrong, healing strong. When he roared, the water shook itself into rings. The creek carried his sound all the way to the valley floor, where deer broke from hiding and ran without knowing why. The Dogman heard it and smiled. It was resting in the ruins of the barn where the fight had first passed hours earlier. The roof was a ribcage open to the moon. It leaned against a wall where old feed sacks hung in tatters and watched the shadows lengthen. It wasn't afraid of dying. Things like it didn't die. They decomposed into stories. Its broken jaw moved out of rhythm, testing the hinge. The bones were knitting themselves with audible creaks. It could already chew again. There were carvings on the boards around it, claw marks, dozens, hundreds, each layer older than the last. Generations of hatred etched by ancestors. The Dogman traced one of the deepest with its fingertip and felt the splinters under the pad. It was reading scripture. The forest had been recording this duel for centuries. Each 100th moon, another. Pair answered the same call, and only one ever saw sunrise. It wondered, not for the first time, what sunrise even looked like. Across the valley, Calder's human mind clawed back up through the black water of instinct. He remembered a woman's hand, her ring cold against his jaw when she said she'd wait for him. He remembered the son who had his eyes. He remembered shooting the first Dogman years ago, believing he'd killed a myth. He had been wrong. You don't kill myths. You inherit them. The creek moved around him, whispering secrets. Every 100 moons, the curse renews. Every survivor becomes its voice. He pressed his forehead to the ground and tried to pray, but could only growl. The forest listened. It remembered. Hours bled by. The moon began to sink, sliding toward the far ridge. The Dogman rose. Its chest still leaked light where lightning had kissed it, but the wounds were closing. It limped from the barn into fog that glowed faintly like smoke over coals. The werewolf felt the vibration of its steps and answered by standing. Between them, the air turned thick and cold. The forest was not large enough for both anymore. They could feel the pull, the invisible tether drawing them back together, the old law of predator and heirloom. The Dogman's eyes shone amber, the werewolf's silver. They reflected each other until there was only one color between them, moonlight, stripped of warmth. Calder lifted his head and whispered, voice thick and torn, "I didn't ask for this crown." Somewhere behind the eyes, the beast answered. "The moon doesn't ask, it appoints," he roared, a sound of refusal and recognition tangled. The Dogman heard it and started down from the ridge. They would meet again before dawn, both knew it. The forest's pulse quickened to count the minutes, mist rose from the creek like breath. The trees leaned to see better. Every star hid. The ground hardened underfoot, preparing for impact. When they came within sight of each other once more, the moon broke from its last veil of cloud, and the world went red again. They stood motionless for a heartbeat. The werewolf's fur glistened wet, silver turned crimson. The Dogman flexed its ruined hand and smiled a broken smile. Somewhere in the valley, a rooster crowed. Early, wrong, terrified. The sound froze them both. They turned toward it in unison, then back to each other. There would be no interruptions. This night belonged to blood and ritual. They began to move, slowly at first, the way tides decide to turn, then faster. The ground forgot its silence and trembled. Leaves flew up, caught in the backdraft of fury. Every scar in the world woke and ached in sympathy, and in the moment before collision, Calder felt the strangest peace, a thought like wind through hollow bones. Maybe this is what gods dream about when they sleep. Then they met again, and the dream shattered. The forest never truly sleeps. It hoards quiet like ammunition and spends it when blood is cheapest. Hours leaned forward. The moon sank, but would not concede. Its light thinned to blade edge, carving the fog into ribbons that fluttered and rejoined, like cauterized wounds. The ground remembered every scream and set them humming in the roots. The Dogman moved first. It did not hurry. It carried its ruined hand like a banner, each drip a black bead on a rosary of spite. Where it passed, bark wore a new scripture. 4 furrows, deliberate, evenly spaced to the spacing of a craftsman who measures with pain. It stopped at a poplar and pushed the claws in until resin bled and the tree shuddered. The forest understood the grammar. The word was mine. A stag blundered into the trail, all antler and ignorance. The Dogman turned, gripped the rack at the base and twisted. Bone surrendered with a dry crack and a soft thump of knees in leaf rot. It did not feed. It posed the body upright against a trunk, head lolling on a broken hinge, tongue a red pennant pointing downslope. Then it stepped away and admired the message it had made. Cruelty placed like a candle in a window. The scent found the werewolf. Before the sight did, it came on a draught that licked the fur at his throat, a blend of copper, tallow, and the bitter aftertaste of fear shed too quickly. He slowed. The fog around his ankles brightened, silver threaded with threadbare red. When he saw the deer propped like a warning, something in him tilted. Calder rose in the eyes for a heartbeat, a man's horror trying to stand, and the beast shoved him back down with a snarl that tasted like old iron. He reached out, laid a claw on the deer's shoulder and pushed. The body slid boneless to the ground. The gesture cost nothing and meant everything, not yours. From the dark beyond the dead, a sound arrived that cut deeper than the bark scrapes and bone cracks. It was a woman's voice. It was not hers, but it wore her timbre like borrowed jewelry. Soft, smoke-colored, torn at the edges by a throat that had never learned tenderness. Calder. The werewolf froze so hard frost tried to take root on his fur. The voice came again, nearer, truer, shaped to fit the exact angles of memory. Calder, don't. The last word broke on a little breath the way it used to, 1,000 nights crashed into one. Porch light. Steam on the bathroom mirror where she wrote his name with a fingertip. The click of a badge case closing. His promise inside it like a moth pinned to cork. The forest filled with doors that no longer opened. The dogman stepped from the brush, smiling a human smile on an inhuman face. Its jaw still hung a touch wrong, lending the mouth an intimacy it did not deserve. Calder, it breathed, and the name became a leash jerked twice. The werewolf rolled the sound in his chest and crushed it under weight. He launched. Speed shattered. Distance. He crossed the space between them as if the world had forgotten to be wide. The dogman rotated half a step, and the strike took the tree instead, pine exploding into a bouquet of spears. Sap flashed into glitter on the arc of his claws. They were close enough to smell each other's teeth. They did not circle. They began to edit. The dogman carved the wolf's flank. The wolf titled the dogman's jaw another degree toward ruin. Each exchange removed an option from tomorrow. Blood formed maps on stone. Steam lifted as commentary. They wrote an argument. Only bone could read. The dogman taunted as it worked, a thread of stolen syllables sewn between growls. Bad dog. Stay. Down. It didn't matter what the words were. The meaning lay in the cadence in the cruelty. The werewolf answered with a new grammar. Motion as clause, impact as verb, silence for punctuation. He stepped through the voice, not around it, and slammed the dogman spine first into a rotten stump that burst into a cloud of spores. The knight coughed. For a while they fought in tight quarters, every move a knife fight in a phone booth. Nails screeched on stone. The dogman's long arms tried to make distance and kept finding the wolf's chest instead. The wolf's shorter reach made a virtue of necessity and kept finding organs with a surgeon's economy. When the dogman hooked a hind claw behind the wolf's knee and pulled, the werewolf dropped, rolled, and rose already cutting. A ribbon of fur and skin peeled from the dogman's ribs and flopped wet against a sapling, hanging there like a flag, in a wind that had lost interest. Something inside the werewolf deepened. The color at the edges of his vision went from silver to white, then from white to absence. Bones thickened by a hair, ligaments sang a higher note. The moon had found a little more room in him and moved in without asking. He felt larger where it counted and smaller where it hurt. He stepped into the dogman's space with that rented strength and made a new rule. They crashed through laurel that gave way like wet paper and slid into a drawer where the storm had dropped a lattice of limbs. The ground was a puzzle of half-burnt wood and damp ash. Their feet found purchase, lost it, found it again. Sparks leapt under their claws, small constellations born and dead between blinks. The dogman grabbed a branch whose core still nursed an ember, swung it in a flat arc, and the air filled with orange commas. The werewolf ducked the first swipe, weaved the second, bit the branch in the middle and cracked it, chewing fire like a mad king. He spat coal into the dogman's eyes. The scream that followed had content. They broke the draw's far lip together and tumbled into a hollow where fog gathered like regret. Here the world was quieter, sound wrapped in wool. Their violence looked muffled, as if memory were already, trying to soften it for later. The dogman raked, caught the wolf's ear, and tore half away. Warmth ran down the neck. The werewolf took it and gave back a gouge along the belly that opened and closed with every breath like a second mouth learning. Words. The dogman pressed its palm to the slit and felt it knitting from both ends, pulled the hand away to admire the craft. Nothing, then something, then nothing again, as if the wound were a trick of light. They separated by mutual revulsion, stood, panting, watched the fog move like a slow animal between them. Neither believed in mercy, both understood triage. The dogman flexed the ruined hand and winced, then used it anyway, because pain is just a story the body tells when it thinks it's being ignored. The werewolf rolled his shoulder in its socket until the joint decided to behave. He grinned with too much tooth for friendship. The dogman tried language once more, and tripped on its own ambition. King, it rasped, but the word arrived as gravel and left as smoke. The werewolf answered with something that was not a word and meant the same thing. Their meanings met in the air and snapped like magnets. They moved again, slower now, deeper. The fight had become a ritual with steps prescribed by Marrow. Open, close, take, pay. Each exchange leaked history. The Dogman's eyes flickered with caves and carrion fires, with winters survived by understanding that meat tastes sweeter when it has hope left in it. The werewolf's gaze held porches at dusk and a service pistol left in a drawer under socks, kept not for use, but because belief needs a weight. They brought those histories to bear as if they were extra teeth. The forest added percussion. Somewhere a limb split under its own water and fell, clapping them forward. Somewhere else a fox found the stag the Dogman had ruined and made a small sermon of gratitude. The creek upriver dropped an inch and sighed like a fever breaking. All of it fed the duel the way the audience feeds the stage, by pretending it isn't doing anything. When the lull came, it was because both needed to hate. More accurately, they stopped at the lip of a ravine and stared into it. The water at the bottom moved in black braids over rock. Their breaths came visible and drifted sideways in the slight draft. The moon peered over the rim like a peeping judge. The Dogman stepped down first, that wrong, beautiful, lope-absorbing slope like a trick. The werewolf followed, choosing stone when there was stone, mud when there was no stone, silence when the choice was only noise or wisdom. The ravine offered them a floor of slick leaves and patient water. They accepted and began again. The Dogman went for joints, trying to steal tomorrow. The werewolf went for tendons, trying to change how today ends. Both strategies worked and failed in bursts. Blood chased itself downstream, found eddies, drew tight red spirals around fish that were not there. The Dogman slipped and decided to pretend it meant to. The werewolf did not slip. He fell on purpose into the Dogman's knees and took the legs briefly from under it, then sprang away before the embrace could become love. They climbed out opposite sides, turned, and jumped at once as if called. Mid-air they collided, chest to chest, arms out, legs tucked. The whole world narrowed to the click of fangs closing on nothing. They hit the slope rolling, came up laughing like lunatics who have remembered the punchline at last. A laugh frightened the things that had survived the night so far. It should have. The Dogman changed tactics, turned its head, and bit its own wrist hard enough to pop the scar tissue. Fresh blood ran. It shook the hand until drops spattered the ground in a dotted line, leading into thicker timber. Then it stepped aside, became negative space, and listened. The werewolf looked at the blood, tasted the air, and did not follow. He stepped perpendicular, made his own dotted line with the tip of one claw, a series of parentheses that bracketed the Dogman's sentence and made the meaning smaller. They were beyond clever, beyond rage. They were entering the theology of violence. The forest dimmed around them, or perhaps their eyes had adjusted to a darker kind of seeing. When they found each other the next time, they did not bother with distance. They pressed foreheads together and shoved, a test from another religion. The Dogman's breath smelled of rust and habit. The werewolf's breath smelled of rain and verdict. They stayed there long enough to make the air between them old, then both tore free with a sound that moved leaves 50 feet away. Above the tree line, the moon had thinned to a coin you could lose between couch cushions. Dawn was a rumor whispered by birds that had not yet forgiven their throats. The Dogman lifted its head and scented the change. The werewolf felt it in the marrow like a draft under a door. Time had shortened. The night had pulled its belt in another notch. There were only so many steps left. They took them, sideways through cedar, forward across shale that skittered like things trying to be elsewhere, down a cut that smelled of damp limestone and old fear, up into a stand of pines where the wind had combed the needles into lines that all pointed the same way. Finish. When the clearing opened, a ragged hexagon of grass bounded by rock and deadfall. They entered from opposite angles without breaking pace. The dogman's ruined hand had stiffened into a club. The werewolf's missing ear bled slower, then not at all. Both bodies had learned to lie convincingly. Both souls had stopped asking questions an hour ago. The first exchange in the hexagon took a tooth from the dogman and a thumb claw from the wolf. The second took a memory. Neither would be able to conjure the precise shape of the sky over their childhood any longer. The third took mercy and folded it, neat, into a vest pocket neither wore. They paused only because gravity needed a turn. Knees unlocked, backs straightened. The dogman lifted its chin and managed something like a bow, not to concede but to mark the end of rehearsal. The werewolf returned it, because some rituals predate language and survive extinction events. They breathed together once. The clearing leaned in. They broke the world again. They became blur and verdict, consequence with claws. The dogman took the wolf's throat and was denied by the angle. The wolf took the dogman's eye and was denied by the lid arriving late as a shield. They wrote lines on each other that would be read at distances creatures like them pretend not to believe in. They found the middle, lost it, found it, lost it, found it one last time and locked there. When they fell apart, it was because the ground had shifted a fraction and their feet chose differently. They landed facing the same way, toward a gap, in the trees where a sliver of light had found a path. They stood there a breath and panted and watched the sliver widen like a cut reopening. Dawn. The word did not comfort. It hurried. They turned back to each other, and without agreement began the last march toward the place where two lives overlap only once. Each step made a sound like a page turning in a damp book. Each step shortened the story, and when they collided again, it was with the understanding that the night had enough room left for exactly one voice to be loud. Smoke crept between the trees like an animal afraid to admit it was born of fire. The air glowed faintly with ember dust, every particle a dying star. The ground had gone soft with ash. Each step sank and sighed. The forest smelled of iron, rain, and the sour sweetness of meat too long torn. The night was half gone, but it would not release its claim. The werewolf moved through the ruin it had made, breath scraping the inside of its ribs like a whetstone. The fur on his shoulders was clotted black, his arms latticed with half-healed rents. Each movement promised another failure of the body, yet he walked like gravity owed him. Above, the moon had thinned to a shard, a broken crown balanced on invisible points. The dogman limped somewhere ahead, always ahead, leaving prints that filled with water before they could dry. It was slower now, but the slowness had purpose. It wanted to be followed, wanted the story to end where endings look best. Open ground, dawn rising behind, no one left to watch but the trees. The werewolf followed. He could hear the dogman's heart beating in the stillness, a drum buried under earth. Every beat a dare, every dare a memory. You killed one of us once, now kill the truth of it. Branches tore at his flanks. He didn't feel them. Pain had become the white noise of existing. He smelled water, stale, oily, a lake, shallow, ringed with reeds. The dogman's silhouette waited there, hunched against the horizon, its reflection broken in ripples. One good gust and both images would vanish. Calder, the faint ghost of him that still lived under the fur, understood something then. This was not a fight for territory or revenge. It was a ritual of continuance. The moon demanded an heir, the curse needed a mouth, and the last one standing would speak for all the things that howl when they should beg. He stepped out of the trees and onto the shore. Mud sucked at his feet. The dogman turned its head but didn't rise. Its breath came in rattles, wet and musical, the kind of sound lungs make when they're more wound than organ. Its eyes were gone. In their place, two narrow slits of light leaked upward, tracing small halos in the air. It smiled. It waited. Calder roared once, loud enough that the reeds bent flat and the lake quivered. Then he ran. They met in the shallows. The impact threw spray high enough to kiss the moon. The dogman's claws sank into the werewolf's chest. The werewolf's jaws closed on its throat. Flesh parted, water boiled around them from their heat. They twisted, fell, rose again, slipped, collided. Every heartbeat came with the certainty that the next would be the last. The dogman fought like something already dead, trying to remember the choreography of life. Its movements were jerks of muscle memory, sharp, efficient, cruel. The werewolf fought like something trying not to live forever. He wanted this over. He wanted a choice. The dogman's claws found his heart once, barely missed. The next pass tore a groove down his ribs deep enough to show the shine of bone. Calder howled, or animal, human, everything at once. He shoved the dogman back, grabbed its ruined arm, and bit through the wrist. The hand came free with a gout of steam. The dogman screamed, voice cracking into syllables of some language older than grammar, a language made of endings. They clashed. Again, slower now, each motion heavy, deliberate, sacramental. The dogman lunged. Calder caught it midair, used the last of his strength to throw it against a half-sunken truck rusting at the lake's edge. The vehicle folded like foil. The dogman hit, slid, and lay still. Calder staggered forward, one arm, hanging useless, claws dull with blood. He approached the broken creature. It was still breathing, barely. Its chest rose once, fell twice, then steadied. The light in its ruined eyes dimmed. It looked up at him, mouth moving around sounds that were not meant for ears. Finally, it found one word. Inherit. Calder froze. The dogman's breath rattled again, then stopped. Silence swallowed the forest. He sank to his knees beside the corpse. The water lapped at his thighs, whispering small, cruel benedictions. His reflection wavered. Two shapes overlapping, two mouths, two sets of eyes. The curse was already moving. He could feel it slide through him like a new pulse, like molten metal through hollow veins. He pressed both hands to the dogman's chest. For a moment, nothing. Then a single heartbeat answered, not from the body, but from within his own. He gasped, his spine arched, the world tilted, his fur bristled, changed color, silver at the roots, rust at the tips. The dogman's amber glow bled into his pupils, turning the silver to gold. His claws lengthened, his breath came out in smoke. He was both and neither. The curse had chosen a hybrid throne. Calder stood. Around him the lake steamed like a cauldron. The moon had begun to fade, paling toward dawn, but before it vanished, it flared, one last flash of approval or surrender. He howled. The sound was wrong in every beautiful way, two voices braided, a harmony of predator and sin. The forest bowed. Trees leaned, water drew circles outward, as if pushed by invisible hands. The air itself trembled, acknowledging the new law. When the echo faded, the dogman's body was gone. Only claw marks in the mud remained, and a few floating shreds of fur, drifting like ash. Calder turned toward the east. The sky there was pinking, the first line of light crawling across the ridge. He took a step. It left a print, half paw, half foot. Smoking faintly, he took another. The print filled with water and vanished. By the time he reached the tree line, there was no trace of him, only ripples crossing the lake where he had knelt. Behind him, the sunrise found the crown he hadn't wanted. It gleamed once, then dissolved into mist. Dawn arrived like an apology that didn't know the words. Light seeped into the trees through 100 thin wounds, each ray a needle stitching the horizon closed. The smoke had surrendered to dew. Ash lay quiet as snow that had forgotten how to melt. Birds tested their throats with dry clicks and decided to stay silent a little longer. The forest was not done being a church. He walked through it alone. Each step printed the argument of what he was, half paw, half foot, edges feathered with steam that vanished as quickly as breath on glass. The ground did not creak beneath him. It accepted his weight the way a confession accepts the sinner, without conditions and with full knowledge of the cost. His fur had taken a new shade in the night's last hour, silver drowning at the roots into rust at the tips. His eyes, once winter pale, now held a candle flame gold, and in that light lived two animals with one hunger. He paused in a stand of young poplars where cicadas had stacked their empty skins on bark like trophies. The shells crinkled under his touch and slid down in patient avalanches. He could hear through the wood, sap lifting, beetles gnawing, the soft thud of something far underground changing its mind about where to grow. The forest's body was loud to him now, every root a nerve, every stone a knuckle. If he closed his eyes, the map of it unfurled behind his eyelids in threads of heat and pressure. He was no king the way men mean it. He was the top of the weather. He was gravity with teeth. The lake softened behind him into a rumor. The hill of lightning lowered its shoulders and tried to look ordinary. But the scar of the night's violence would show every winter when snow laid itself down and refused to cover that circle. Stories like bare places better than lush ones. They can see their reflection there. He found the barn again because the night had put a mark on its door, and because memory is a leash even when you call it something prettier. The roof had slumped further during the storm. A row of nails along the eaves had rusted into a line of coppered tiers. He stepped inside and stood where the Dogman had rested with its back to scripture. The carvings on the boards were easier to read now. He could feel which claws had written which lines: old rage, new rage, practice rage. Some of the marks were not Dogman at all. One set was high and parallel, and had healed the board around them smoother than the rest. Those had been a different beast under a whiter moon. A metal tang ghosted the air, as if a century ago someone had held a silver coin between their teeth in this room and dared something to take it. He set his palm to the wall and pressed. The barn answered. The echo that came back was not sound, but lineage. The names of things that would never have names, handed down by a ceremony without witnesses. He stood there until his handprint warmed the wood enough to fog, and where his fingers lifted, the haze left 5 ovals that did not match each other, man on thumb, beast on the rest. It looked like a signature written by a committee. When he stepped outside, the road waited. Not a real road, just the old logging trace grassed over, bordered by foxholes and the mouths of groundhog palaces. The first sunlight thinned across it like varnish. He walked it by habit he didn't own. A mile down, a mailbox leaned drunk beside a crushed culvert. Fissure in flaking paint. He knew the house before he saw it. Porch swing that never stopped, even when wind denied it. 3 broken slats on the rail, a nail where a wind chime used to hang. He could smell coffee that hadn't been brewed in a year. He could taste argument in the wood. He stood at the edge of the yard and listened to the absence of voices. The man climbed up from below his ribs and tried to stand again. It hurt more than any wound. Alder imagined reaching for the screen door, imagined it giving under a gentle push because it never could bear a firm one. He imagined her bare feet padding from the kitchen, the grin she had built just for him, the way it cracked and reformed when she saw he had brought the night home with him. He imagined a small room down the hall and a bed with a mountain of blankets, the humming snore that came and went when the boy rolled to face the wall. The boy was gone. The house was empty. Stillness sloshed in it like a bucket half full. Stepped back, and the old boards did not protest because they preferred a beast to a ghost. At the fence line he turned and stared until the sun painted the windows into mirrors. He looked at himself there. Long, wrong, fur bristling where shoulders argued with gravity, and nodded once as if concluding a trade. He had nothing to bring back inside that wouldn't rot what was left. He walked on. By mid-morning, fog lay only in hollows, and spider silk had stitched the distances into harp strings. He plucked them with his shoulders as he passed, and the dew trembled. Small rain happened in single drops. The path took him to the stone church on the ridge, the one with the bell everybody forgot how to ring. Its door was unlocked, because this was a county that trusted wood and prayer more than locks and lawyers. He ducked inside and sat where pews had polished children's bones into patience for 200 years. The saints in the windows looked tired of saving. He admired their endurance. The air was cool even when the sun dragged its knees across the floor. Dust motes bustled like old women tidying, never satisfied. He could hear the chapel too, how the rafters held their breath through storms, how mice edited the hymnals, how the bell wanted a throat so badly it hummed in sleep. He whispered his name. It came out twice. The second voice did not harmonize. It took the lead, and the old wood listened hard. He waited for an answer. Churches give answers more often than they give solutions. The answer was the same one the lake had tried to tell him. Every 100 moons, somebody has to hold the night by the ears, so it doesn't eat the whole town. He did not say, Amen. He stood and left that small square of shadow sweeter than he found it. At the edge of the churchyard, a child's marble lay half buried where the grass refused to grow. He picked it up between finger and claw. Swirls of blue and white turned inside it like a small weather. He remembered a day at the kitchen table when a hand smaller than his had tried to teach him how to shoot these little planets across a ring, traced in flour. He set the marble on the church step and rolled it down. It stopped in a crack and gleamed like an eye. He was proud of it, and the crack both. By noon the sky was the color of worn-out denim. Clouds grazed slow herds along the ridge and grew fat on nothing. He crossed back into deeper woods and let the canopy take his shadow apart. The crown he hadn't wanted rode him very lightly and very absolutely. It did not feel like a weight on the head. It felt like a hook in the heart. Wherever he looked, the forest organized itself to be seen. Paths unbraided, threats thickened. Calm lay down like a dog at his heel. He did not command it. He endured it. That is all kingship is when the throne is made of bones and weather. Afternoon tilted, and the light went honey thin. He found the rail trestle where the Dogman had written, "Come take me in frost." The mark had fled with the night, but the wood remembered pressure. He pressed his palm there again, and the timber answered with a hollow that sounded like a drum very far away, a march only he could hear. It led not to a town or a house or a job, but to the next clearing, the next hill, the next story with blood in it. He walked until evening learned his name. When the first star pushed a needle through the deepening blue, he stopped beside the stone circle where lightning had glazed the ground into the world's smallest lake and where his prince had dried into rumor. Crickets began at last. Something in the forest exhaled a long-held breath and did not pull it back in. He lifted his face to the sky. The moon had not risen yet. The hours between belonged to deer and men. He did not hate them for it. He envied their oblivion like a craftsman envies a tool that never breaks. He spoke then, not loudly, because truth doesn't need volume. I am not man, I am not beast. I am the balance between their sins. The circle heard him. The trees repeated it, leaf to leaf until the creek picked it up and mumbled it to rocks. Somewhere miles away, a farmer paused over his ledger, put a finger to a column of numbers and forgot what he was adding. Somewhere a woman woke with the taste of rain in her mouth and checked the door twice before she could sleep again. Somewhere a stray dog pricked its ears and wagged once at nothing. Newly brave, night climbed the ridge in dark handfuls. The moon rose slower than the eye could forgive, pale as parchment pressed to bone. When it found the top of the sky, it hung there. Like a habit, he felt it before he saw it. A pressure change, a tightening in the fine gears behind his eyes. The crown tugged. He answered. Fur crept, tendon-tuned. The hybrid thing that was his body greeted the old tide with new manners. He did not hide from it. You do not hide from weather. You choose a tree and put your back to it. You lower your head and let the storm comb you. He howled once, not the long wound the night expects, but a shorter thing, trimmed to meaning. The sound rolled out and bent around hills and came back leaner. Coyotes answered and regretted it. Owls swallowed and looked righteous. The valley put a hand on its own heart to feel how fast it was working and decided to slow down. He began to walk the borders, not because they were drawn on a map, but because they felt like places where things fray. He followed fence lines and creek bends, the edges of fields where tractors turned circles into squares. He paused at culverts, where water was too lazy to be river and too proud to be ditch. He watched the road in 3 places until the same pickup passed all 3 and told him everything about the man inside, alone, angry, out of coffee. He did not interfere. A king who thinks every problem is his becomes a tyrant before the week is out. His rule was made of less. Near midnight he found fresh tracks where the tree line forgot to keep deer honest. He tasted the air and knew young. Hunters with old rifles had come this way, thinking the ridge was just a ridge and the moon was only pretty. He angled wide, herded their scent with his own until they crossed back over their own footprints and believed they were lost. They turned home because anger and coffee are easier in kitchens. They would tell stories tomorrow about the way the fog seemed to push, and someone's grandmother would cross herself and add another lock to the cellar door just in case. He stood at the high place where his blood had boiled the rock and let the second half of the night settle like a cloak. Down in the pines, a fox laughed at a joke evolution tells to make the dark less rude. Up on the ridge, the wind learned his edges and sewed its own ragged hem to fit him. The moon dimmed toward morning, and with it the hook in his chest relaxed to a gentler ache. He had carried the weight through the trial. He would carry it through the next. That is the bargain. You keep the night honest, and the night does not. Take the town hall. When the east paled, he faced it without blinking. Light moved through the trunks like a rumor becoming fact. Fog gathered its skirts and went downhill to drown where day would not follow. Birds rehearsed, failed, tried again, found their notes. He listened and decided the chorus was acceptable. He breathed once more, slow and complete, and the breath traveled the valley like a decree. The forest agreed, the water agreed. The stones, being conservative, withheld judgment, which is how they agree. He lowered his head and began to walk toward wherever the line next frayed. At Whispering Narratives, we don't just tell stories, we keep the night honest. If you made it through this hunt, mark survival. Subscribe before the next full moon. Because out here the crown never stays on one head for long, it just waits for the next howl.